Thank you, Madhav. It's good to be back speaking at the JP Morgan India Investor Summit. My talk last year had focused on three interrelated aspects relevant to both India and the Adani Group. First, the implications and fallout of COVID for India. Second, the relevance of our democratic system in doing business in India. Third, the Adani Group's vision for and role in shaping India's infrastructure. As I look back, it is staggering to see how much has changed over the last 12 months. The global economy has gone through unprecedented turmoil. Despite everything, what has not changed is my belief in the promise and opportunity India represents. In fact, my belief has only grown stronger, and our learnings from this crisis will make both India and the Adani Group more resilient and more prepared to face the future with confidence. Here, I must repeat a caveat I made last year. As an entrepreneur, I am by nature an optimist. The lenses through which I see the opportunities may be different from some of yours. I am committed to the viewpoint that you cannot build long-term value on a short-term thinking. I do recognize that this may not be in the alignment with the objectives of a broad, risk-driven segments of the investment community. Speaking of lenses, everything we do today is filtered through the COVID lens. The impacts and implications of the pandemic are and will continue to be far-reaching. Some are permanent and some yet to unfold. COVID has been a wake-up call for every nation. It has changed geopolitics and accelerated a new world order. Whatever our views, we can all agree that India had nothing to do with the virus, yet has suffered some of its most drastic consequences. Perhaps we could have done some things better, and of course, every life lost is a tragedy. But the sheer size of our populations arguably makes the challenge posed by COVID in India greater than in any other major nations. India has more people than Europe, North America, and Oceania put together, which also means that India's vaccination effort is larger than the combined efforts of 87 other countries. For comparison, while the daily vaccination count in the US is currently around 800,000, India is vaccinating 12 times That number or around 10 million people every day. Even if the United States and other countries have completely vaccinated a greater percentage of the populations, the pace at which India has accelerated its vaccination program, despite all the hurdles, is unmatched. This does not mean that there cannot be any criticisms. In a democracy, we must hold ourselves to account. But in the rush to lay blame and find fault, it is possible that we fail to acknowledge another, more positive side of the story of how we handled and continue to handle the COVID crisis. Criticism cannot be at the cost of our national dignity. It cannot be at the cost of degrading our nations. It cannot be about dividing the society. Under the liberty of press freedom, coverage cannot be a bias. There is always another side of the story which unfortunately was not told. I have often stated that over the next 2 decades, India will have the biggest and youngest middle class that has ever existed. We will be the market that every global company will target. And we must use this scale to take a greater part of our destiny in our own hands. I also anticipate that over the next decade, India will be among the world's top 4 countries in terms of market capitalizations. This is leverage from which we must benefit. To say we must take our destiny into our own hands is not to resist globalizations. The expansion, integration, and deepening of trade and finance among nations is inevitable. But the world is not as flat as Thomas Friedman may have made it out to be. There are bends to navigate, and the pandemic just proved that the bends are sharper than we had anticipated. In my view, an increased focus on self-reliance is the single most important learning from this pandemic. India's growth will be driven by homegrown companies and those international businesses that are truly committed to being and acting local. But as if the pandemic were not enough, yet another challenge looms ahead of us, and India will have to play a major balancing role. If the crisis in 2001 was the bursting of the dot-com bubble, and in 2007 the bursting of the housing bubble, and if in 2020 the crisis was the pandemic, we now have to collectively confront and manage the crisis of climate change. Some people rightly call this a green swan event and defined it as risk we humans have created for ourselves by suboptimal management of ecosystems that in turn destabilizes the global climate. The essential difference between a green swan event and a black swan event, like a pandemic, is the certainty in the green swan risk materializing, the certainty that will be of much larger magnitude, and the certainty that the specific outcomes will be less certain. What makes this crisis even more tricky is in how scientists model the climate change risk and how the risk managers factor them into their financial models. There are no such models, thus impacting global finance in multiple and yet to be understood ways. However, what is certain is that managing the climate crisis will require every country in the world to unite, perhaps like never before, and work together. Climate change is a complex and exponential multiplier that accelerates the existing challenges that humankind faces and makes them all worse. The biggest challenge we face is that without effective global coordinations, the massive and growing inequality between the haves and have-nots will be irreversible. Let me talk about the challenges from India's perspective. There is a stubborn resistance to the idea that if developed economies do not bear their share of responsibility, developing economies will have to deal with extreme climate impacts at the expense of their own development. This effectively means those who bear the brunt of a climate change will also be the poorest. Therefore, the biggest balancing act will need to be the coordination between the governments of the developed world and the developing world. I can already see the possibility of developing economies being asked to sacrifice their growth to stay aligned with the climate goals of developed nations. This surely would be unacceptable and so must be collectively addressed. 2. 2019 Stanford University studies published by the prestigious National Academy of Sciences summarize this point. The first study found that the gap between the world's poorest and richest countries is about 25% larger today than it would have been without global warming. The second, an India-specific study showed that India's economy is 31% smaller than it would have been in the absence of a global warming. These are terrible statistics that we must find a way to reverse. Here, I will make two observations and one suggestions that may be unpopular with some advocates of a climate reform. First, those criticizing the pace of climate reform in countries like India must remember that the economic and industrial might of the West sits on a carpet of a carbon suit several centuries deep. 100 years ago, today's climate reformers were burning over 800 million metric tons of the coal. That is more than what India produces today. From pre-industrial times until now, India accounts for only 3% of the extra carbon in the atmosphere and will eventually end up consuming less than 8% of the entire remaining carbon budget. All this while supporting 1/6 of the world populations and being one of the fastest growing market in the world. Second, those criticizing our reluctance to directly adopt Western advice on climate change must deeply consider the disparity in the situations. It is impractical to suggest alternatives that the developing world does not have, cannot use, and cannot afford. When electricity accounts for about 30% and transportation 29% of the carbon footprint, compared to agriculture, which accounts for just 10% of all emissions, it is a paradox. The prosperous man in the brightly lit home with more than one car in his driveway cannot insist that the poor farmer give up his only cow and keep his house dark to save the earth from greenhouse gas emissions. There has to be a more equitable way. In my country, more than 250 million households and millions of small businesses that generate jobs rely on the availability of a cheaply produced electricity. To switch off that power without an economical alternative in place would put hundreds of millions of people on an accelerated path to darkness. And there are several other nations in the same situation. This is not about pointing fingers, but an essential perspective we must collectively keep in mind as business and political decisions are made across the world to tackle the climate crisis. Well-intentioned and necessary pacts and arrangements should be careful not to compromise the principle of international fairness. The worst case scenario would be that in following our need to become green, we adopt a structure that deprives are developing nations people of hope and of opportunities to better their lives? If so, the search for sustainability will in itself become unsustainable. All this being said, I am in absolute agreement with the science that states climate change is a clear and present danger. I also firmly believe that it is a science that will help us find an optimal path towards a win-win solution. In the context of the two observations I made, there will have to be a tapered approach, one that moves the solution down a slope rather than off a cliff. The path forward must include an international accord that is implementable, accountable, and considers the individual situation of each nation. It must factor in the rates of projected per capita emissions and a mix of incentives and penalties that would ensure that every country does its part. After all, we now remain awake to the fact that much like the rampaging coronavirus that knows no borders, a carbon dioxide molecule too respect no borders. I expect the upcoming COP26 will cover a lot of this ground. While I have laid out the challenges as an entrepreneur, I also see hope on the horizon. This comes from my appreciations of the market forces that have started pointing towards economic opportunities that are arising out of the global effort to combat the climate change. I believe these opportunities will equate to trillions of dollars over the next 2 decades as technologies evolve rapidly. These include next generation high efficiency solar panels, new materials that makes a massive offshore wind turbines affordable, mainstreaming of carbon capture technologies, various fit for purpose battery technologies, smarter and distributed grids, green hydrogen technologies, electrical vehicles, plant-based meats, and much more. I also believe that the advances in digital technologies and machine learning will further stimulate innovation across every single one of these technologies and create their own markets. The sheer power of the economies and policies that will back this development can compress the timescale required to achieve global energy transition goals. No doubt, several existing industries will be disrupted and made redundant, but at the same time, new industries will be created. There is also a real possibility that the marginal price of green power will drop steeply in the future as technologies mature and economics of scale kick in. This will enable the next big manufacturing boom, which in turn will create a new jobs. This is what we should all collectively be aiming for to create an equitable tomorrow. It will not be easy, but as the great poet Antonio Machado said, "Hey walker, there is no road here. The road is made as you walk." On our part, the Adani Group remains aligned with India's positions on sustainability, will exceed the goals India signed up for, including India's NDC target of achieving 33 to 35% intensity reductions. We are also confident that our integrated value chain, our scale and experience puts us on the path to be the producer of the least expensive green electron anywhere in the world. Today, we are already the world's largest solar power player when we account for our generating, under construction and contracted projects. We have done this in just 2 years, and our renewable portfolio has reached our initial target of 25 gigawatt, a full 4 years ahead of schedule. This puts us well on track to be the world's largest renewable power generating company by 2030. This also opens up several new pathways for us, including setting us to be one of the largest green hydrogen producer in the world. Our actions clearly indicate that we are putting our money where our mouth is. Over 75% of our planned capex until 2025 will be in a green technologies. Today, of our EBITDA from utilities, 43% is already from the green businesses. We will triple our renewable power generation capacity over the next 4 years, from 21% now to a high of 63%. No company is building at this scale. Over the next 10 years, we'll invest over $20 billion across renewable energy generation, component manufacturing, transmission and distributions. We will be the first port business in India to get to operational net zero by 2025. This business has committed to 1.5 degree pathway through SBTi. We will be the first Indian data center company that will be power all its data centers with renewable energy by 2030. It is not just us. Others too, among India's strongest conglomerates, have announced significant plans in the renewable energy space. As the nation's industrial giants pull its resources together, I have a very little doubt that India will continue to be a beacon of hope in the mission to build a more sustainable world. We are in a position to set an example for most major nations of the world to follow. Let me now talk about our other businesses. Our principles stay unchanged and much on the lines of what I outlined last year. I summarize This has three key steps. First, focus on infrastructure sector that are underserved and critical to nation building. We are now India's largest private sector power producer, largest private port operators, largest private airport operator, largest private consumer gas and electric utility business, largest private electric transmission company, and largest infrastructure developer in renewables. Second, grow by expanding into adjacent sectors and incubate new businesses within Adani Enterprises, which when ready will be spun off as independent publicly traded companies. Following these principles has led to continue strong returns for our shareholders. A 1 rupee investment in Adani Enterprise, that was our first IPO in 1994, has given a CAGR of 36% over the past 26 years compared to 10% return by Indian indices. Third, in each of our businesses, develop deep operational expertise and then grow aggressively, both organically and through acquisitions. In just the last 8 years, we have acquired over more than 50 assets amounting to about $12 billion. Every one of this has been successful, and we have continued to get better at integrating the acquisition we make. This is a rare capability we have built. Let me now talk about two of our newest and most exciting businesses, the airport business and Adani Digital businesses. The Adani Group's plans for airport-centered growth include metropolitan development that span entertainment facilities, e-commerce and logistic capabilities, aviation-dependent industries, smart city developments, and other innovative business concepts. The best example is our Mumbai airport. Mumbai is on its way to being one of the top 5 global metropolitan centers of the 21st century. Also, with India's passenger traffic expected to grow 5-fold, our nation needs 200 additional airports to handle 1 billion domestic and international passengers, most of whom will be using an airport or route connected to Mumbai. We will not only scale the existing airport, but also operationalize the Navi Mumbai International Airport by 2024. This airport will handle 80 million additional passengers. This coincides well with India's becoming the world's 3rd largest aviation market. We see airports as a catalyst for development and believe that economic value created by India's cities will be maximized around airports. With regard to digital business, our upcoming new businesses will include all of our digital related ventures that now span data center, industrial clouds, and Adani Digital Labs. Earlier this year, we established Adani Digital Labs as a part of Adani Enterprises to be able to provide a unified experience to all our end users. Today, our end consumer base is growing at a 15%. If we can onboard every consumer that is an Adani consumer on our digital platform, we will potentially have over 1 billion consumers by 2030. I have a very little doubt that every one of our own B2C businesses will be engagements driven on mobile platforms. Therefore, the consumer insights we will obtain through a unified platform will set us on the path to building our own super app platform. While we have a reason to be satisfied with our business performance, our real phase of accelerated growth is just beginning. This is because the benefits from having a portfolio of companies with several strategic adjacencies is now mainstreamed. This unique growth model offers us ever increasing access to an unlimited B2B and B2C market for the next several decades. Whatever businesses we are now in, seaports, airports, logistics, natural resources, thermal and renewable power generations, transmission, distribution, data centers, defense, real estate, city gas utilities, financial services, and many others. All of them individually continue to be high growth businesses. But even more importantly, every one of them has adjacencies within themselves that open gates to new sectors we can move into. This very distinctive Adani model combines the power of adjacencies with the bridging capability to encompass a B2B2C spectrum and helps build a platform that puts us on the path to infinite possibilities, especially when backed by the tailwind of an economic powerhouse like India. To wrap up, let me say that while the combination of the pandemic, the climate crisis, and geopolitics over the past 12 months has introduced new levels of uncertainty across the world, there have been very specific learnings for everyone. The primary one, in my view, the need for self-reliance, and I will stick to what I have said in the recent past. The action the Indian government is taking to put in place the foundation to build resilient India, and India that taps into its own markets An India with a system that is based on dignity and equality. An India that has the courage to aspire. An India that is a responsible power and strong at its borders will put us on a path of growth that no nations can match in size, scale, and most importantly, democratic traditions. This should give hope to all Indians. It should give hope to the world. As a nation, never in our history have we created a crisis, but have always stepped up in support to help the world get through a crisis. This collective spirit is embedded deep into us and comes from our own ancient learning of Seva Parmo Dharma, which translated means our primary duty is to provide service to mankind. I remain optimist that all of us will emerge stronger, and the next 12 months will lead to a world that is more understanding, more cooperative, and believes in the power of collaborations. Thank you for your time.